Welcome to Creamer Media's Polity. I'm Amy Witherden. I am at the Electoral Institute of Southern Africa in Richmond to meet with Ebrahim Fakir to discuss press freedom and the public interest. Ebrahim, please outline the reasons behind the right to press freedom.
Well, I think in a free and open and democratic society, a provision for a free press is an important provision, simply because you need the freedom to educate, to entertain, and quite importantly to inform. It's a vital function that the media plays in any society. When we talk about the issue of press freedom, we're talking essentially about a democratic right which underpins an open society. And I think the important provision here is the question of an open society, because an open society would allow the press or the media to fulfill a function beyond merely informing, entertaining and educating. It also acts as a vital check of accountability, of demanding responsiveness, of articulating both the perspectives of people, ordinary people in society, and perhaps also communicating to the society news about what its leaders are doing or not doing, whether they're doing it well, whether they're doing it badly, whether they're doing it inappropriately, and even in cases, certain instances, whether they're doing so immorally, unethically, and perhaps even illegally. So it's an important function in a free and an open society that the media not only informs, entertains and educates, but also acts as a democratic check on behalf of society, for society, to fulfill the functions of informing and educating and transmitting news and information, which is a very vital function, I think, to inform people, because without the knowledge, without the information, without access to information, particularly in the world we live in today, where economies are information driven, these provisions are vital. Our constitution, in fact, makes this a fundamental right, especially in the Bill of Rights in section 16. It says that there should be a free and unhindered press and media and the ability and the space to do so, but it's a vital component of fundamental political and social rights.
Now, how has the ANC Youth League infringed this right?
Well, the accusations that have been made by certain journalists that there was the attempt to unduly influence them to report in certain ways, or not to report in certain ways, is in some ways some people interpret an infringement on this freedom. I take a slightly different view. My view is that the media is always open to influence. I think the media should not be immunized from influence. That's not the argument I'm making. The argument I'm trying to suggest is that there are forms of appropriate influence and there are forms of inappropriate influence. Of course, this is quite apart from the fact that you will have direct or indirect influences, but clearly what appears to have happened through the complaint that has been laid by some political journalists about what the ANC Youth League has attempted to do is not only inappropriate influence, it is also an attempt to unduly influence in a threatening manner. That's quite simply what I'm trying to argue, is that it's inappropriate for them to sit with this information and then threaten people with it. But of course it's not surprising that they will do so. I mean, a political party, or at least someone who's fighting for political hegemony or is acting in the political space as a private actor, is going to do this and use this for their own advantage, even though I think it is unethical and probably also immoral.
Ebrahim, you suggest in your recent opinion piece that both the ANC Youth League and the aggrieved journalists were wrong to address their concerns to private actors rather than public institutions.
Well, I think in this distinction, Amy, between what we assume to be public and private, let's take political parties for instance. Political parties, when they're in power, when they are in representative institutions, when they are represented in local councils, in a provincial legislature or legislature in our case in South Africa, then they are assuming and playing a public role. But by definition, a political party is an association of people who come together to pursue certain ideas, certain objectives, and as such, they are a private entity. They don't exercise any public power. So that means they are not sitting with a statutory defined role to do certain things. until and unless they are represented firstly in institutions where laws are made and where those laws are executed, nor are many of the people who are in the political parties who these journalists complain to holding any public office in government. So they are not acting in or working in the capacity in a government department or a statutory body which has been defined by Chapter 9 of our Constitution. And so when the journalists went to lay their complaint, it is strategically appropriate that they went to these organizations and that they went to these individuals, because these individuals exercise considerable influence over the behavior of some of the members of the Youth League. So it's not inappropriate that they did so. However, I think that there were broader public principles at stake in this matter. And if the journalists were going to respond to in a higher order in defense of a public principle, they would actually take this matter to certain public authorities, to authorities which have a statutory defined role in promoting, in enhancing, in preserving the rights and freedoms which are enshrined in our Constitution. Because I think you can point, as the journalists themselves do, of in some instances clear breaches of certain provisions made in law about the holding of information, accessing certain types of information, where you get it from, how you get it, and so forth. So it appears as if the Youth League had got this information from certain private individuals, then they would, if there was evidence of criminal behavior which needs to be investigated, then it ought to be taken by the Youth League to certain public authorities. And in the same vein, the journalists who have evidence that the Youth League was sitting there threatening them with information, then the public protector ought to be probing where that information had come from. Was it leaked by staff of certain public institutions? And then of course then we know what the state and trust and confidence in those our own trust and confidence in those public institutions are, whether we have people in there who are willy-nilly sending out information inappropriately and unethically that they ought not to be doing. And of course, if they've done so in a criminal way, then there's a criminal case which has to occur. So there's clearly public principles at stake here, and not just addressing the concerns of these private individuals, the journalists, who, of course, everyone agrees are aggrieved, and everyone agrees, I suspect, that they also deserve our support in this. But I suspect that that support has to be contingent on the fact that they actually act in defense of the private principle, rather than just merely expect that the political principles of the ANC Youth League would act and influence them in a positive way. That is a good thing, influencing them in a positive way. But I think it's equally important, where we are trying to establish a public culture of respect for provisions in our Constitution, and respect the distinctions between public and private, and respect the public ethics that we have also as expressed in our Constitution. Then some of these matters ought to be solved not through influence alone, but also through establishing clear boundaries through rules and regulations which are issued either by one of our Chapter 9 institutions or by courts and police who do the investigations.
Great. Thank you, Ebrahim.